All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, Baruch Meir and Rina Dubin, for dedicating all the Shimon Joshos this month in the Schus of Refuah Shalema for their niece, Chavetzi Pora Bas Chaim Malka. To thank Shmuley and Liba Dinovitz for dedicating the Shiurim in the Schus of an Aliyah for the Neshama of Shmuley's father, Rav Paretz Avram, Ben Binyamin Moshe. To thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Ira and Miriam Grossman, in honor of their 50th wedding anniversary. And to thank our Daf Yomi Shir sponsors for today, Baruch Fischel and Sonia Kozlovsky and family for dedicating the Shir commemoration of the yard site of Mr. Leon Kozlovsky, Aryeh Ben Baruch. Mr. Kozlovsky has a special schos and a special place in this year, as he was one of the founders of our Shul's Daf Yomi program, together with a number of holy and precious Jews. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, his neshama will have an aliyah and his family a nechama. And also with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. Today's daf is Kuf Tes 109, and we are picking up Emir Hashem at Kuf Ches Amud Beis 108b. Specifically, we are picking up at Ula Amar. So it is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. Okay, a lot. 21 lines up from the bottom. Ula Amar. So I'll say, remember again, we're trying to figure out in yesterday's daf the interesting discussion about whether or not, here's what we've established based on the Mishnah very quickly. Based on the Mishnah, we established the concept that halacha l'maisa, once miyun, if a marriage ends by miyun, then ultimately, again, there's an ability to resume that marriage later on. If marriage ends by a get, then by definition, the isra of machzir grushaso, of going ahead and remarrying one's divorcee, will once again set in. Of course, all of this is despite the fact that what? That Allah Chalamais, we're talking about all rabbinic marriages. So Ula Amar, Ula explained the distinction as saying, Kigon Sheshilsha Begittin. We're talking about a girl, a minor, who got divorced multiple times through Gittin. Demechse Kigdola. That at that point in time, again, she has the appearance of being an adult, given the fact that she's been divorced so many times. To which the Gemara says, Mantana, Amar Rav, Maidichsiv. So let's listen to this. Rabbi Yehuda said the name of Rav. What's the meaning of the pasuk? Meimenu b'kesef shasinu, eitzenu b'mechir yavo. So this is incredible. The pasuk that the Gemara is quoting over here from Eicha, that literally, again, we drank our water. So what it means is, it cost us money, right? Drinking water cost money. We're only able to bring our wood with money. What does this refer to? I will say what it means is the water over here is a metaphor to Torah. So what it means is there were times where obtaining Torah was expensive. So what is this a reference to? This is actually the second time in a week that we've referenced this episode of Rabbi Akiva being incarcerated. So what does this mean? In a time of danger, in other words, it was referring to the time where Rabbi Akiva was incarcerated by the Romans, and it was illegal to learn Torah. So at the time of Sakana, they asked this halacha, if, let's say, again, Rachel left Ruvain with a get, but ultimately left Shimon with miyun, does she have the ability to go back and remarry Ruvain? So Sakra Adam Echabar, they hired a guy for 400 zuz, an incredible amount of money. They went and asked Rabbi Akiva in jail. Why do they have to hire a guy for 400 zuz to ask Rabbi Akiva the Shaila in jail? Because remember, going to ask Rabbi Akiva Shaila was sakana. It was dangerous. He was incarcerated for teaching Torah. So now you're sending someone to ask him a shaila in prison, obviously sakana va'asar. And ultimately, again, Rabbi Akiva went ahead and he asared it. He said that such a practice would have been us. In other words, that once she leaves, whichever husband she leaves by a get, right? Ultimately, again, after she goes and marries someone else, she can't go back to that husband. Any husband she leaves with miyun, she can't go back. As Rabbi Yehuda ben Nitzivin, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira ben Nitzivin. Similarly, again, they asked Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira in Nitzivin, va'asar. and he also forbade this practice. I'm Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. Lo lezuhu tzrachnu, lo lezuhu tzrachnu. Rabbi Shmuel Yossi says the truth is we don't need that. We don't need a psak halacha for this particular scenario. Why not? So the Gemara says very simply, the iser kares hitarta le iser lav lo kol shekin, because halacha l'maiseh avosai, if when it comes to an Isser Kares, Rashi says over here, Isser Ishes Ish, Hifkata mimena below get, Ama in Maisa Shlaklum. If you're letting her remarry, ultimately again without a get, i.e., again, we're talking about miyun, right? So if you're letting her remarry someone else without any semblance of a get, le'isr lav l'kol shekin, machzir grushaso is only an isr lav, baram kach shalu. This must have been the question they asked Rabbi Akiva in jail. If you had a case of a woman who was married to her mother's brother, which is a case of a shnia, remember rabbinic arayos, v'nasa achiv me'aviv umeis, and then she married the brother from the father's brother, and he died. Ma'usha temayin hashta v'takrena l'nesuin kamai v'tisyabim. Ultimately, again, does she have the ability to do miyun now? Go ahead and retroactively unravel her marriage and do yibum. Yesh miyun la'achar misa b'makom mitzvah olo. We'll say it was a different shayla asked Rabbi Akiva. Can you do miyun b'makom mitzvah or not? I should say it differently. Can you do miyun after the death of the husband b'makom mitzvah? Sachru shnei b'nei adam ba'arba me'ozos. They hired two guys for 400 zuz. Uba v'shalaz Rabbi Akiva beis asur v'asur. That's Rabbi Akiva in jail. Rabbi Akiva said it's asur. As Rabbi Yehuda ben Beser ben Etzivin, v'asr. Rabbi Yehuda ben Etzivin, and they asred. Am Rabbi Yitzchak Parishana Modirav shemuteres la'achiv shalzeh shene'esra alav. But Rabbi Yitzchak Parashian said about Rav agrees that halacha l'maisa, she is permitted to the brother of the man to whom she is prohibited to marry. In other words, the prohibition to remarry any of these men at Moses and Rabbanon, and therefore his brother, so to speak, will be mutter. So pshita, that's obvious. Who nihu demichras bermizosav ukrisosav aval achivlo. Both say, going back to yesterday's daf, it's only the first husband who we are concerned that halacha lamaisa could go ahead and try to lure her back, woo her back into marriage, but his brother's not the case. Ma'adatim, what would you have thought? Ligzar hai atu hai. Perhaps we should be gozer on the brother, lest you come to marry the actual man we're concerned about. K'mash malon no. V'igad amar Yisrael barishan. Kashem shasur lo. The same way that she is usher to him, so too she is usher to his brothers. But she's not. But there's no concern of being lured back. Ultimately, it's gzera about her brothers, lest she come to go ahead and marry him. Good. I will say, bottom line, what do we take from this particular sugya? Here's the bottom line takeaway. We'll say the Rambam and Hilchos Gerushin. Parak Yud Aleph Halacha Tezayin says as follows. We'll say here is the Halacha L'maisa component. Hamima enes beish eino migurashes mimenu. That's the line. When a girl does miyun, that's not gerushin, right? I will say miyun and a get are not the same thing. When a woman does miyun, she is not a migurashes, and therefore the dina in baila shemer nabo kedina emishal kid shami olam. And I will say this is incredible. Her relationship to listen to this. Rachel is married to Ruvain, Kiddushay D'Rabbanan. Her brother married her off. Mother married her off. Now Rachel does miyun. What's Rachel's relationship to Ruvain after miyun? The Rambam says her relationship to Ruvain is same relationship as any other man in this world. There is no vestige of a marriage in the aftermath of miyun. He mutares bekrovav, v'muta bekrovoseh. She can marry his relatives, he can marry her relatives, and not only that, v'la pasla min hakuhuna. She is not forbidden to marry a Kohen. Rabbi say, isn't that the most incredible thing? After miyun, she is not prohibited from marrying into the kahuna. And therefore, again, the Rambam says, therefore, if she does miyun with Ruvain, marries Shimon, and then either gets divorced or Shimon dies, what's the halacha? She can go back and marry Ruvain. It's not called machzir grushaso. So Rabbi say, we see now that halacha l'maisa, miyun is not the equivalent of gerushin. After miyun Rabbi say doesn't just see, and now we see that we made this distinction yesterday. Herein lies the fundamental distinction between a get and miyun. See, a get severs a marriage, but even once you sever a marriage, there is still what? There's a vestige of marriage. There's still some vestige of that relationship. She's a grusha. She can't marry a Kohen. She's forbidden to remarry him when she marries another man. Miyun doesn't sever. What does miyun do? Remember from yesterday, what does miyun do? Miyun erases. Miyun erases. So once miyun is done, ultimately, again, full erasure of previous relationship. Incredible. Mishnah. Hamagari isha vechzira. So we'll say, interesting case. A man divorces his wife, and then he remarries her. Muteras liyavam. She is permitted to do yibum. Now we'll say, what's the case over here? First case is regular marriage. Reuven marries Rachel. She's an adult. He's an adult. Ultimately, again, they get divorced. And then he remarries her. So Rabbi said, now what happens after he remarries her? He dies without children. So what's the halacha? Rachel does yibum. Then Rabbi said, what's the novelty in this? The novelty is, you might have thought that since there was a point in time where Rachel was not permitted to marry Shimon. When wasn't Rachel permitted to marry Shimon? See, Rabbi said, in that moment where they got divorced, Rachel was not permitted to marry her ex-husband's brother. He's an erva. You might have thought that since there was a period of time where he was, again, a defined erva because she was a grusha, that even once they get remarried, yibum is prohibited. Kamash malon, not so. Kamash malon, that once they get remarried, again, the permission for yibum once again sets in. So the Gemara goes back to the top of Kuftes, Rabbi Elazar Oser. Rabbi Elazar says it's Aser. We'll see why. The Chayin HaMagar should say so, and I will say now back to our case that we've been dealing with. So too, if one divorces a Yisoma, and I will say Yisoma in this context means what? A girl who doesn't have a father and who has been married off by who? Her mother or her brother. So this is a Kitana. This is a minor. So a girl who's been married off by her mother, but she's called the Yisoma because the only way this case could happen is if she doesn't have a father. So we'll say, listen to this. So a man goes ahead and is married to Rachel. Rachel is a minor who was married off by her mother, we'll call it. And what happened? The Gemara says, and he divorces her. Reuven divorces her, and then we'll say, divorces her with what? Divorces her with a get, right? That's the case here. Divorces her with a get, right? Vechzira, and then remarries her. Mutaras liyavam. Once again, she's permitted to marry the yavam. So now that case over here is Reuven's married to Rachel, Kiddushay Dirabanan, divorces her, remarries her, and now he dies without children. So now she falls before Shimon for yibum. So halacha l'maisa, she is mutar to go ahead and do yibum. Rabbi Elazar Oser. Rabbi Elazar says it's aser. Again, Rabbi say we'll see what the Machlokes says in the Gemara. Ketana shesia aviv and eskarsha ki soma b'chayi ha'av. Rabbi say, listen to this. What about a ketana who is married off by her father? Now, Rabbi say, remember again, what happens when a father marries off his minor daughter? What's the status of that marriage? What's the status? Right, real marriage. That is kiddushay da'araisa. Viniskarsha. Now, Rabbi say that can you do miyun from that type of relationship? From that, no. Miyun only works in rabbinic marriage. If the mother or the brother married her off. But if the father married her off, that is Kiddushay Da'araisa. So Rabbi says, so now watch this. Rachel is married off by her father to Reuven. So now what happens? Reuven gives her a get. So Rabbi say, what's her status? Ki soma b'chaye ha'av. She is like an orphan with a living father. Rabbi say, you hear that lashon? An orphan with a living father. Which means what? In other words, she has parents, but her father, after that divorce, no longer has any rights in her. We'll discuss that. So we'll say, now watch this. Now we'll say, now watch this case. So Reuven marries Rachel. Rachel's father marries her off to Reuven. Okay? They divorce. He gives her a get. Now he remarries her. She's still a kitana. He remarries her. Now we'll say, now Reuven dies. What's the halacha? Divrei hakol asur liyavam. Everyone agrees in that case she can't do yibum. We'll say, watch this. Why can't she do yibum? Because Rabbi say, this is very interesting. But look at Rashi. Because Rabbi say, listen to this. In this case, her divorce is a biblical divorce. Ve'in chazarasa gimura. But Rabbi say her marriage is only what? A d'Rabbanan marriage. Because how is Reuven remarrying Rachel? It's not through her father. Because father only gets one opportunity to marry off his minor daughter. So when they remarry, what type of marriage is it? What type of marriage is it? It's d'Rabbanan. Ve'in chazarasa chazara gemura, v'kiddushe kitana enan klum, ho'ilu pakos chosav, v'hi ein layad, v'havia kegrusha va'omedes. So we'll say, this is absolutely incredible. So watch this case. Right, Rachel's father marries her off to Reuven. Okay? What type of kiddushin is that? Or what type of marriage is that? Daraisa. Reuven divorces Rachel. What type of gerushin is that? Doraisa. Reuven remarries Rachel. What type of marriage is that? D'Rabbanan. Reuven dies. That's death. Doraisa d'Rabbanan, right? So ultimately, again, right? So Reuven dies. Now Rachel falls for Yibum. Rabbi say, could she do Yibum? The Mishnah says, absolutely not. Why? Rabbi say, what's Rachel's status? What's Rachel's status? What's Rachel's status? She's technically still a grusha. Midda Oraisa, she's not married to Reuven. Midda Oraisa, she's a grusha to Reuven. Midda Rabbanan, she's married. It's a strange case. Midda Oraisa, she's a grusha. Midda Rabbanan, ultimately, again, she is a married woman to Reuven. Well, both say that's not going to permit her to do Yibum, because ultimately, again, Midda Oraisa, her brother-in-law is like the brother of her ex-husband. And ultimately, again, the Kiddushay D'Rabbanan is not going to enable Yibum. Incredible case. So we'll say, let's analyze. Amar Ifa, my time Rebbe Lazar. We'll say, what is Rebbe Lazar's logic? So we'll say, Rebbe Lazar says in every single one of these cases, right? So we'll say, in these cases, essentially what you have over here is as follows. You have a man divorcing his wife, remarrying his wife, and then dying, right? So we'll say in case number one, it's with consenting adults, right? In case number two, it's rabbinic marriage, right? Mother married off the daughter, right? Divorce, remarriage, death, yibum. So in all of these cases, Rabbi Lazar says you can't do yibum. Chachamim say you can. What's the pshat? So I'm ready for my time, Rabbi Lazar. So Rabbi say it must be. Rabbi Lazar's logic is like this: once there is an active state where Rachel is prohibited to Shimon, even if the state changes, the prohibition doesn't go away. So Rabbi say, what's happening in all of these cases? In all of these cases, Rachel gets divorced. So Rabbi say, what's her relationship to Shimon in that moment of divorce? What's her relationship? Shimon is her ex-husband's brother, which is an erva. It's aser. So Rabbi Lazar is going to say, once she had that state, even though she subsequently remarries, that state of Isser doesn't go away and Yibum will be aser. If that's the case, chalitza nami lo tibai, then she shouldn't have to do chalitza either. Maybe you'll say, you're right, she doesn't do chalitza, but that's not true. Rabbi Lazar will say, it's incredible. Rabbi Lazar says that Yibum in these cases in the Mishnah is aser, but she still has to do chalitza. To which the Gemara says, "Allah Amar Ifa Rabbi Lazar lo yedana my time." Rabbi Lazar, this is great. Ifa says, you know what, you're right. I have no idea why Rabbi Lazar says what he says. I will say, by the way, what courage it takes to say, I don't know. I don't know. I will say, sometimes you see lines like this, and you wonder, like, why is it included in the Gemara? Why is this necessary? Just kind of strike it from the record. I will say, because again, we constantly hearken back to the Gemara Masechah Shabbos of Lamad Lashon Chalomar Eini Yodea. Teach your tongue to say, I don't know. It's so tempting when you don't know something to pretend like you do know something. Because saying I don't know requires an incredible degree of humility. So more often than not in life, we kind of just stumble our way through, make something up, mumble something that sounds good. If you don't know, have the courage to say you don't know. Amr Abai says, Hainu Tem Rabbi Lazar. What's Rabbi Lazar's logic? So the Gemara says, Mesafka. I both say this is incredible, and this is such a yesodistic idea. Rabbi Lazar was Mesupak. Very exciting Gemara. Imisa mapeles. Inisuin harishonim mapilim. Rabbi say, what was Rabbi Lazar unsure about? Rabbi say, this goes back to the beginning of Yevamos. Rabbi say, we had this discussion. When is Yibum eligibility established? Is Yibum eligibility established at the time of the death of the husband, or ultimately again at the time of the initial marriage? Right? Rabbi say, you hear the Shaila? When is Yibum eligibility established? When is it established? See, if you say, now watch this, if you say that the time of death establishes Yibum eligibility, haram yakameli Yibum, then I both say in this case, right? Where again, the minor girl was married off to Ruvain by her mother, right? And then what happens? They get divorced, right? They get divorced, and then they get remarried, and then he dies. At the time of death, ultimately, again, eligibility is intact. We're good. However, Inisum harishonim apilim ha'amda alav sha'achas, which was the first wide line. But if you say that it's the time of marriage, then here's the problem. Then what? They divorced. And ultimately, again, in that moment of divorce, she was ineligible for Eboom, right? Her brother-in-law became an additional layer of erba. So that's Rabbi Elazar's suffix. When is Eboom eligibility established? At the time of marriage? Well, in this case, marriage ended in divorce, right? And ultimately, again, at that moment of divorce, there's an Isser. Maybe that Isser stays with them. Or Eboom eligibility is determined at the time of death. We don't look at anything that occurred before death. And at the time of death, she's married to Ruvain and therefore eligible. That's Rabbi Elazar's suffix. And therefore, again, that's why he says in these cases, you can't do Eboom, but must do Chalitza. Rabbi say Rava says no. The Olam Pshita, Rabbi say second wide line. The Olam Pshita, Rabbi Elazar, Demisama Peles. Rabbi Elazar knows that. Rabbi say, we've already established this a long time ago. Eboom eligibility is determined when? At the time of death. At the time of death. Umiu, listen to this, fascinating. Hakol bekin begirishin, then hakol bekin bechazara. Everyone is an expert when it comes to divorce, but not everyone is an expert when it comes to remarriage. We'll say, what does that mean? Everyone knows about divorce, right? When someone gets divorced, everyone knows about it. But say that's not because people are yentas. That's because a get is designed that way to generate a kol. We want people to know about divorce. That's why, again, a get has to have edus. That's why a get has to have also b'farei. Yeah, we'll get into this in Mir Hashem. A get has a kol. Remarriage doesn't always have a kol. Therefore, again, the Gemara is adrabah, just the opposite. Chazara came in the Yasla to say islay kala. When people get remarried, of course people know about it that it has a kol. People see the couple living together. Rather, milo askilan da hadra ba'arta v'shachiv b'tzafra. Maybe the case could be where he remarried her at night and he died that next morning. So there was a kol about the get, but there was never a kol what about the remarriage. Rabbi Elazar is concerned in that kind of case that if you allow Eboom, what's going to happen? People aren't going to know about the remarriage. And all they're going to see is what? Rachel, who's divorced from Ruvain, marrying his brother Shimon, which is an Eser Erba. Therefore, again, Rabbi Elazar says in these kind of cases, we'll say that it's Aser. Okay, Rav Ashi is another interpretation. Hainu times Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi say all of this trying to figure out the Shita Rabbi Elazar. What does Rabbi Elazar say? The Gazer Hani Mishum B'Chayi Ha'av. Rabbi say Rav Ashi comes. Rav Ashi says no. Rabbi say let's work backwards. There's one case where everyone agrees Eboom is Aser. Right? You will say, what's the one case? Remember the last case in the Mishnah. Let's go through this once more. Father marries off his daughter Rachel to Ruvain. We'll say, what's the nature of that marriage? Daraisa, by biblical marriage. Then what happens? Ruvain divorces Rachel. What's the nature of that divorce? Daraisa, right? Father has to be makabel the get, Daraisa. Now what happens? Ruvain remarries Rachel. Rachel is still a kitana. What do we call Rachel? What's her halachic status? Yisoma b'chaye avia. She is called an orphan during the lifetime of her father. Why is she called an orphan? Because again, once she divorces her father, well, really once she marries, her father no longer has any rights in her. And even once she divorces, her father still doesn't have any rights in her. So we'll say now they divorce, and now what happens? Reuven and Rachel remarry. What's the status of that marriage? D'Rabbanan, right? Because Rachel's still a kitana. D'Rabbanan. Reuven dies without children. Is Rachel allowed to do Eboom? No. Everyone agrees no. But say, why not? Because Midda Oraisa, what's Rachel's status? She's a grusha. Midrabanan, she's a married lady. But Midda Oraisa, she's a grusha. So I was saying, a Da'oraisa grusha can't do Eboom with her deceased rabbinic husband's, well, it's not good English, right? With her deceased rabbinic husband's brother, right? In other words, both say, because Midda Oraisa, she would be marrying the brother of her ex-husband. So it doesn't work, and everyone agrees in that case. Comes along Rav Ashi, and Rav Ashi says, every other case, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Eliezer, I think he changes it to Rabbi Eliezer. Yeah, the Hagosim changes to Rabbi Eliezer. Every other case where Rabbi Eliezer asers is to prevent this case. So really, Rabbi Eliezer is hyper-focused on this last case of the Mishnah, Yisoma b'chayei aviyah. And he answers every other case, lest you come to this case. So the Gemara says, how can I understand? Brother, this seems to be clear. Mediktani Sefer, so look at the end of the Mishnah. Kitana shesia aviyah v'neskarsha. If you have, the case I just mentioned, a kitana, right? So Rachel's father married her off, and then to Ruvain, then they get divorced. She is like Yisoma b'chayei aviyah. She is like an orphan during the lifetime of her father. V'echzira, and now Ruvain and Rachel remarry. Divrei akol shasur liyavam. Everyone agrees that when Ruvain dies without children, Rachel is not permitted to do Eboom. So the Gemara says, "Hi, my lememra pshita." The both say the truth is that case is obvious. That Gemara say it makes absolute sense. Why? Because again, she is a biblical grusha and only a rabbinic nisua. So of course she can't do Eboom. Elalav hakamash malan. So I will say, why is that case brought in at all? Watch this. Elalav hakamash malan. Tamid Rabbi Lazar de Gazar Hanach mishum hai. Because Rabbi say the reason Rabbi Lazar answers in all of the previous cases in the Mishnah is in order to go, is why? Lest you come to confuse the previous cases with this last case. So all the previous prohibitions in the Mishnah are to safeguard this last case of Yisoma b'chayei aviha. To which the Gemara says, Shema mina. Tanya Chavasi Ravashi. Ravashi seems to have hit it on the head. Modim chacham Rabbi Lazar b'ktana shesi avia v'neskarsha. The chacham agreed with Rabbi Lazar in the case of the Kitana. Rachel was married off by her father to Ruvain, V'neskarsha, then they get divorced. And then Hari Kison b'chayei av, she is like an orphan with parents during her father's lifetime. Then they get, then they get remarried. V'echzira, shasru liyavam. That both say now Ruvain dies, that ultimately again she is asura to her yavam. Why? Here it is, here it's spelled out. Because both say her divorce from Ruvain is a biblical divorce. So we'll say, by the way, I think I just mentioned this in past, but I'll mention it again. How does Rachel get divorced from Ruvain? She's a ketana. Right? The father is makabel her get. Right? So her father is makabel her get on her behalf. So now she is a divorcee mid'oraisa. Ve'in chazarasa chazar gimura. But her remarriage is only a rabbinic remarriage. So Rabbi say, when is this true? Ultimately, what? When she is divorced, when she is a ketana. So all of this presupposes her divorce took place when she was a ketana, and what? Her marriage took place her remarriage took place when she was a ketana. Aval girsha kishi ketana. But if Ruvain divorced Rachel when she was a ketana, and what? V'chzira kishi gidola, and remarried her when she is a gidola. They both say then, or inami hechzira kishi ketana, or remarried her when she was a ketana. The gadla etzlo, and then she became a gidola during the marriage. Umeis, then he dies. They both say in those cases, o choletzes o mis Yevamos. See, they both say in those cases, then what? Then Rachel can do Yibum or Chalitza. Why? They both say why? Because in that case, her second marriage is what? Is Daraisa. Right? So either again, he remarried her, Ruvain remarried her once she's a Gedol. If she's a Gedol, she's a consenting adult. That's a biblical marriage. Or again, he remarries her as a Ketana, but he doesn't die immediately. She becomes a Gedola in the context of the marriage, stays in the marriage, which means she accepts the marriage. Now that morphs into a biblical marriage as well. If he then dies, then Einachinami, she can do Chalitza or Yibam. I both say the only time she can't do Yibam is in a very specific case where she's getting remarried as a Ketana and is widowed as a ketana. Because then Rabbi says she has this really riveting scenario where again, she is a grusha da'oraisa, a nesua, a married woman dirabbanan, and therefore she can't do yibum because of her divorced status. To which the Gemara says, Mushram Belazar Amru, Rabbi Belazar nevertheless says, Cholet says Velomes Yabemes. Rabbi Belazar says in both of those cases, still she does chalitz and not yibum. So we'll say, Rabbi Belazar seems to say, very interesting, that even in those cases where he remarries her as a gedola or remarries her as a ketana and she becomes a gedola, he still holds she can't do yibam. Rabbi Belazar is so hyper focused on that case of Yisoma b'chayei aviyah that he answers yibam in all of those cases. We'll see how he paskin. By my name, Rava Mirav Nachman. So we'll say Rava ultimately asks Rav Nachman. Sarasa mahu. What about her co-wife in these situations? Amrle, he gufa gzera. This girl herself is a gzera. Va'anoneko menigzera gzera l'gzera u'shming gzera l'gzera. Va'tayim Rabbi Lazar amru hi v'tzarasa choletzes. But we said in the name of Rabbi Lazar that both he and her co-wife have to do chalitza. So it sounds like even the co-wife has to do chalitza in these cases. To which the Gemara says, "He v'tzarasa sachadaitcha." No, elalav ohi od sarasa choletzes. Rather, what it means is either she or the co-wife have to do chalitza. To which the Gemara says, "Lav tarutze kamitaratzta." You're trying to answer this up. You could just as easily answer it a different way. Taratzachi hi choletzes. Sarasa ocholetzes omes Yevamos. You could just as easily read it as saying she, this girl, has to do chalitza, but maybe her co-wife could do chalitza or yibum. So the Gemara says there's no definitive way to go ahead and reason out this question from the previous Gemara. Bottom line, Abosai, halacha l'maisa, how do we paskin? Let's work backwards. So Abosai, everyone agrees in the last case. What's the last case? Yisoma bechaye aviha, right? So Abosai, halacha l'maisa, yisoma bechaye aviha. So Rachel is married off by her father, married off to Ruvain. Nature of the marriage, daraisa, right? Good. Now they get divorced. Remember again, Abosai, can you do miyun in a situation like that? No. Miyun is only an option by rabbinic marriage, mother or brother. Father married her off, so again now Ruvain and Rachel decide to divorce. Who does Ruvain give the get to? Rachel's father. Good, now they're divorced. Now they get remarried. Mazel tov, right? They're remarried. Now Ruvain dies. What's the halacha, Rabosai? So everyone agrees, Ruvain dies without children. Everyone agrees, what's the halacha? No yibum. No yibum. You have to chalitza. Now interesting, why do you have to chalitza? Because there's still a rabbinic marriage, and remember again, chalitza really never hurts, so to speak. So she's still going to have to do chalitza because there was a rabbinic marriage, but no yibum. Why no yibum? Because remember again, mid oraisa, she is what? A grusha. Mid rabbanan, she's in a. So in the fact that she's biblically a grusha precludes any possibility of yibum. Now, Bosai, the caveat to that case is halacha l'maisa if they remarry. And let's say, again, she's not widowed until, again, she becomes a gedola, or they get married when she's a gedola. In that case, then what? We would paskin that yibum would be permitted. Because halacha l'maisa, right? Remember, again, I will say, when do we determine yibum eligibility? At what point in time? At the time of death. Very important halacha. The Rabbi say, the Rambam paskin is like Rebbe Lazar in these other cases. Right, not in the first case, because the first case, Shabbos says, is a simple case that we just spoke about before. If a couple divorces and then they remarry, that halacha, and then he dies without children, halacha l'maisa, she does yibum, because as we just said before, we determine yibum eligibility by what? By ultimately, again, at the time of death. However, the Rambam does pass like Rebbe Lazar in the second case of the Mishnah, the Rabbi say halacha l'maisa, the case where a man is married to a yisoma, kiddushay d'Rabbanan, divorces her with a get, remarries her, and then dies without children. The Rambam Paskin is like Rebbe Lazar in that case, that ultimately she'll do chalitza, not yibum, lest you come to confuse that with the case of yisoma bechaye aviha. So I will say some very important pieces of halacha l'maisa coming out of this sugya. Beautiful. Mishnah. Shnei achros u'shnei acharos was a very interesting case. Two brothers married to two sisters. Don't worry, we're not back into charts, right? This is pretty straightforward. Two brothers married to two sisters, kitanos. So we'll say here's the case. Reuven and Shimon, two brothers, married to Rachel and Leah. Two sisters, both minors. Right? The shteachayos kitanos. Umeis baila shel achos me'en. Shabbos says now interesting case. Reuven dies. And we'll say Reuven dies without children. So now what's going to have to happen? What has to happen? So Rachel, the widow, is going to fall to who? To Levi, the Yavam. And I will say, is yibum going to be possible in this case? No, why not? Sisters. So meis baila shel achos mehen halazu teitzim mishum achos isha. I will say, by the way, in this case, there's no even chalitza, right? This is Yevamos Daf Beis Amud Aleph, right? I will say, so again, it's halacha l'maisa. There's nothing in this case. Why? Because achos isha, right? When it's your sisters, what? When it's your wife's sister, there's no possibility of yibum, so no chalitza either, nothing. Halazu teitzim mishum achos isha. And I will say the same would be in the case of two brothers married to two women who are deaf and mute. In other words, I will say in that case, there's not even proper marriage. We'll see that case as well. Gidolu Kitana, but say now watch this. Let's complicate a little bit, right? What's life without complicated Mishnayos and Maseches Yevamos? Hey, so we'll say, so now Reuven and Shimon are married to two sisters, but Rachel is an adult, right? And Leah is a Kitana. Leah is a Kitana. So watch this. Meis Baila Shel Kitana. So Rabbi says, so now what happens? Shimon dies. Right? Shimon's married to Leah. Leah is the Kitana. So Meis Baila Shel Kitana. So Rabbi says, so now what happens? So Leah, the Kitana, falls to Reuven for Yibum. Teitziak Tanam Shum Achos Yisha. Easy case also. Rabbi say, obviously no Yibum, no Chalitza. Ultimately, again, because Leah is the Kitana and she is the sister of Rachel, therefore nothing. So the Gemara says, Weiter. So Teitziak Shum Achos Yisha. Here's where it gets complicated. Meis Baila Shel Gedola. Watch this. Reuven dies. So now watch this. Reuven's married to Rachel. Rachel is the adult sister. So now Rachel falls to Shimon. Right now, who is Shimon married to? Who's Shimon married to? Leah. Leah is a Kitana. Watch this. Now we've got a problem. Rabbi Elazar says, it's not a problem. Rabbi say, what do? We tell Leah, now remember, Leah is married to Shimon. What do we tell Leah? Do miyun. Why should Leah do miyun? Because if Leah does miyun, she dissolves the marriage to Shimon, and now what could Shimon do? Yibum. Shimon could now marry Rachel, who is an adult. Yibum. Rabbi Gamliel Omer, no. Imlav tamtin ad shetagdil. Rabbi Gamliel says, no. Rabbi Gamliel says, we do not encourage miyun. If Leah wants to do miyun, she could do miyun. But Allah Chalamaisa, we do not tell her she has to do miyun. So say, what's interesting over here is Rabbi Elazar says melamdin. Rabbi Elazar melamdin means not coerce her, but lamaisa we encourage her, we teach her. It's a good idea. It's a good idea to do miyun. So Rabbi Gamliel says no. If she does miyun of her own volition, fine, but we don't teach her to do it. Otherwise, we just wait for Leah to grow up, to become a Gedolah. Once Leah becomes a Gedolah, then what Rabbi say? There's no din of Yibum or Chalitza because of Achos Isha. Rabbi Yeshua says, this is very interesting. Rabbi Yeshua says, Aylo al ishto, aylo al eshes achiv. I will say that seems to be the response to many of these cases, right? Right? Woe to him for his wife, woe to him for the wife of his brother. So what's the halacha? Moties ishto beget. Rabbi said, this is wild. Rabbi Yeshua says, right, Shimon should divorce his wife with a get, and ultimately, again, do chalitza with his sister-in-law. Now, why this is abundantly unclear. We'll have to see in the Gemara. So we'll say, let's analyze. Umishari. Then we'll say, now remember again, we're focusing now on Rabbi Gamliel's, on Rabbi Eliezer's position. Rabbi Eliezer says that in this case, Reuven is married to Rachel, Shimon is married to Leah, and what happens? Reuven dies, Rachel falls to Shimon for Yibum. We encourage Leah, the wife of Shimon, to do miyun. Do miyun, we teach her, do miyun, and that way Shimon can do proper Yibum. To which the Gemara says, is it permitted to encourage miyun? V'atani bar kafra, we'll say a beautiful, beautiful Gemara. V'atani bar kafra, li'olam yidbak adam b'shlosha dvar. We'll say, get ready for this Gemara. Magnificent. We'll say, I know I went a little bit quickly during the daf. I wanted to make sure that we get to cover this Gemara, which is so beautiful. Li'olam yidbak adam b'shlosha dvarim, v'yisrachik m'shlosha dvarim. A person should always go ahead and cling to three things and distance himself from three things. Yidbak b'shlosha dvarim. We'll say, what are the three things you should do? You should always do chalitza. And we'll say, in other words, when it doesn't mean you go out looking for chalitza. I will say what it means is when unfortunately put in a situation of chalitza versus yibum, always choose chalitza. We'll see. We've actually seen this before. It's Abashal. Always choose chalitza. That's number one. Number two, always run after hava'ah shalom, making peace. Uba'afaras nedarim, and always go ahead and annul your vows. Three things. Always do miyun. Always do chalitza. Always be a seeker, right? Someone who facilitates peace. And number three, always annul your vows. Okay, we'll define each. And let's say you should always distance yourself from three things. Number one, miyun. Always distance yourself from miyun. Mina pikdonos. I will say, don't be a person who takes collateral for loans. Umin ha'arbonos. And do not be a guarantor on a debt. Again, we'll discuss what all these things mean. So the Gemara says, before we get into this, I will say here, the Gemara is clearly telling us, don't do miyun, and yet Rabbi Eliezer is encouraging miyun, to which the Gemara says, no, miyun de mitzvah shiny. Miyun of a mitzvah is different. So remember again, why are we encouraging Leah to do miyun in this case? So why are we encouraging miyun? Why? so that Rachel could do Yibum. This is different. When we say don't go ahead and encourage me, so in a regular case, if a minor girl, if a katana is married to a man, we don't encourage me. There's obviously a reason that she's married him. Either, obviously, the mother or brother did this for a reason. So this marriage hopefully provides her with something. We don't encourage miyun. But when miyun allows for a mitzvah, so as we'll say, in other words, when the dissolution of a rabbinic marriage will allow for the performance of a biblical mitzvah, then perhaps in that case, we would encourage miyun. Incredible. Gufa, let's analyze this last brayso. Gufa, Tani bar kafra, li'olam yidabik adam shlosha devarim. Listen to this, let's go back. A person, this is such beautiful Gemara. Tzaddik, what's your name? The Dara Golding t-shirt, what's your name? Ben Sion. Ben Sion, I just want to tell you, Mamish, how old are you? 9 years, we'll say. I'm not going to ask what we were doing when we were 9 years old at 6:30 in the morning. Ben Sion, it is so incredible that you come and learn Torah. And I know you're not, are you learning the Daf normally? No. Okay, good. You're sitting Yevamos out. This one you're sitting out. Ben Sion, Mamish, if you continue to learn Torah from the age of 9 years old, listen to these words, because you're going to appreciate this Gemara right now. There is no telling what you can become in life. And in the schus of giving up some sleep, it's summer vacation, all right? You should be sleeping late. But in the schus of giving up sleep, coming to the daf with your grandfather, should be Zochem Yeretz Hashem to grow into an incredible Talmud Chacham. So let's go right. Incredible, incredible. This is the future of Klal Yisrael. Incredible. The Gemara says, "Li'olam yidabek adam mishlosha dvarim." We'll say a person should go ahead and cling to three things. Here they are: bechalitza, kabashal. We'll say, why should you do chalitza like abashal? Desanya abashal omer hakones es yevimto l'shem noy l'shem ishus l'shem davar acher. Because we'll say abashal holds that if you go ahead and you marry your sister-in-law, you do yibum, for all the wrong reasons, according to Abishal. What are the wrong reasons? Right? Because she's beautiful, because you just want to be married, or she has money, for some other reason. What's the halacha? Ki'ila pogea be'erva. According to Abishal, it's like an act of arayas. V'karov be'enai lios havlad mamzer. We saw this in Abishal, right? And Abishal says, I think the offspring from such a union is like a mamzer. Obviously not really a mamzer, but Abishal essentially says the mitzvah of yibum requires explicit purity of intent. And if there's any shemetz of some other ulterior motive, Abishal says, don't do it. So both say, once you set a bar like that, then Lamais, again, the conventional wisdom is, do chalitza. Do chalitza. Next, hava shalom, we'll say, so these are three things a person should cling to. So one is chalitza. Number two, hava shalom, making peace, being a facilitator of peace. So we'll say, dichsiv, bakesh shalom v'ratfehu. We'll say, seek out peace and run after it. We'll say, this is such an incredible yisod. Shalom always requires redifa. We'll say, you see, it's an amazing thing. One of the interesting things about shalom, about finding or making peace in life, is shalom never shows up at your doorstep. If you want shalom in your family, you want shalom in your community, you want shalom in life, you have to run after it. We see in Pirkei Avos as well, Heve mitalmidav shel Aaron, oev shalom, rodev shalom. I will say, we know this, we just know this from living life. Everybody likes peace. What's the difference? The shaila is, are you willing to run after it? Are you willing to run after it? Are you willing to go ahead and put yourself out, literally, run after Bakish Shalom V'Ratfehu. Avtalion says, or Hillel says, Mitamidah Shalom, Rodev Shalom. Are you willing to run after it? So the Gemara says, Bakish Shalom V'Ratfehu, V'Amr Amad Beis, V'Amr B'Yavo, Asya is great. Asya Redifa. It says so again, but it says by Shalom, to be a Rodev Shalom, Uksiv Hacha, Bakesh Shalom V'Ratfehu. Good, that's our pasuk. Ksiv Hasam Rodef Tzedakah V'Chesed Yimatzei Chayim Tzedakah V'Chaved. There will say, he who runs after tzedakah, in other words, runs after opportunities to be about tzedakah, to do charitable acts, V'Chesed and kindness, Yimtza will find Chayim Tzedakah V'Kaved. So also the way we interpret this ultimately again is he'll find Chayim, life in Olam Haba, tzedakah. I will say the Chaim, so tzedakah, he'll find charity from HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world to come, the covet in this world. So I will say, you see from here that a person who does tzedakah v'chesed in this world, finds tzedakah v'chesed, finds what? Finds reward in this world and in the world to come. So I will say, it says the lashon of rodef over here, and the same lashon of rodef by shalom. So just like tzedakah and chesed have reward in this world and in the world to come, so too if a person is a person of shalom, that has reward in this world and in the world to come. I will say, by the way, what's the reward for Shalom in this world, for being a Rodev Shalom in this world? I will say, what's the reward? The reward is the Shalom. I will say, everyone knows that when you have machlokes, it's terrible. It's terrible. And when you're zocheh to have Shalom, whether it's Shalom bayis, whether it's Shalom with your children, whether again it's Shalom in your community, I will say that is the bracha. That is the bracha. Living a life of Shalom ein bracha gidola mizo. But I will say, if you want Shalom, then ultimately again, bakeh Shalom, seek it out, make it a priority, v'rat fehu, and you have to run after it. Weiter. Ba'afaras, Rabbi said, this is a wild Gemara. What about afaras nadarim? Annulment of vows. Annulment of vows. I will say, get ready for this. Krabi Nasan. So I will say, this is pretty incredible. What the Gemara is saying is, the preferred method in life is, if you made a vow, get that annulled as quickly as you can. So Rabbi will say, whose opinion does this reflect? Rabbi Nasan, the Sanya, Rabbi Nasan Omer, Hanoder, if a person makes a neder, ki'ilu bana bama. It's as if you have built a bama. I will say, remember again, a bama was a private altar used for idolatrous service. So if you go ahead and you make a neder, it's as if you've built a bama. V'hamakaimo, and I will say, if you fulfill the neder, kilu hikriv alav karban. It's as if you offered a karban. And I will say, it's wild. And I will say, by the way, the guy in question, has he done anything wrong? Has he done anything wrong? He made a neder and he fulfilled his neder, right? So I will say, yet the Gemara says, making the neder, it's as if you built the bama. Fulfilling the neder, it's as if what? You've offered up an offering on the bama. We'll say, what's going on over here? Look at Rashi. Kilu bana bama, b'shas isra bamos, t'chotehu, t'chsiv v'chisechta lindar, halo sechta yebachachit. See, I will say, what does it mean if you make a neder, it's like you're making a bama? See, I will say, when a person makes a bama, do they have good intentions? Do they have good intentions? Yeah, of course. Of course. I will say, think about this in just a moment. The Chazon Ish wrote, people think that we're on a much greater level now, that we don't worship idolatry. He says it's not true. He says, I will say, when there was Avodah Zarah, people had a yearning to connect to something bigger than themselves. Now, the truth is, without the Yitzhak for Avodah Zarah, I'm just content serving me. Right? I'm okay, just about making my life about me. So we'll say, when a person builds a bama, as much as a bama is aser, there is an effort to connect to something bigger. So that's good. That's good. And by the way, sometimes also a person builds a bama to Hashem, because we'll say we also built bamas. So I will say, building a bama represents an act, well, for now, according to Rashi, of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it's serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the wrong way. So a person makes a neder, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want nidarim. Why? Because at the end of the day, nidarim are dangerous. Because l'maisa, again, non-fulfillment of nidarim ultimately is what? Carries very severe penalties with it. So therefore, again, Chazal don't want you making nidarim. So when you make a neder, it's like the person making a bama. Well-intentioned, but wrong way to go. And I will say, if you fulfill the neder, it's even worse. It sounds counterintuitive. Why is it even worse, I will say? Because you see, when a person makes neder and fulfills it, what do they think to themselves? Oh, I got this. Come on. It's not so bad. I know I got this neder thing under control, right? I make it, I fulfill it, and I will say that's when things really get disastrous. Because when I think that I'm in control of something, and when I think that I've handled something, that opens the door for all types of negative behaviors. So making the neder is like making the bama. Fulfilling it is like offering a carbon, because now I'm even in a greater danger zone, because halacha l'maisa, I've made the neder, fulfilled it, and now I think I'm in control of nidarim. So therefore, I will say again, a person should stay away from nidarim. And I will say, by the way, it doesn't mean, see, a person often would make a neder as a mechanism to propel myself to do something. L'maisa, we have to be self-starters or self-motivators as well. The ability to get the job done even without having to tap into the halachic mechanism of nidarim. Quite incredible. So we'll say a person should go and distance themselves from three things. Mina mi'unin. We'll say, why do you have to distance yourself from mi'un? From mi'un. Dilma, gadla umichra tabei. Because I will say, why should you distance from mi'un? Because maybe the girl will do mi'un and she'll grow up, right? And she'll have remorse getting out of that marriage. In other words, that was a good marriage. Maybe she was too young to appreciate it. So therefore, avoid mi'un. Mina pikdonos. I will say, this is interesting. Stay away from taking a pikada from a collateral. Why not? So I will say, it's a very specific case. Bebar Masa is talking about someone who lives in the city with you. The Baise Ki Baise Dami. Let's say what it means is don't take collateral from someone with whom you live in the same city and who frequents your home. Why? Rashi says, what are we concerned about? Because the guy, because he frequents your home, what's going to happen? Well, he's going to come into your house. He's going to take the pikadon back. You're not going to know about it. He's going to repay the debt. He's going to demand return of the pikadon. You're not going to be able to find the pikadon, and you're going to be on the hook to pay back for the pikadon. So it's a very specific case. In other words, don't take a pikadon from someone with whom you are familiar with, which I both say is in general like a very good, solid piece of rabbinic advice about not necessarily doing business with people with whom you are friends, right? Because sometimes, again, that familiarity, which is so nice in so many areas of life, ultimately, again, could really backfire when it comes to one's transactional life. Minai Ravon. So we'll say, when should you avoid being a guarantor? Now we'll say, this also sounds like a little bit like, come on, it's good to be a guarantor for someone's debt. So why shouldn't I be a guarantor? Ba'arvi Shaltzion. We'll say, it's talking about, again, the guarantors of Shaltzion. Shaltzion is either a name of a place, Rashi says, or the Maisa descriptive, ultimately, of a type of guarantee. Don't be Yitzchak Mai Dichsiv, Ra Yeroa Ki Arev Zar. So we'll say, listen to this. In the Arvei Shaltzion, I will say in the city of Shaltzion, or this type of Eiravon, so I will say normally halachically, how does a guarantor work? I borrow $1,000 from Ruvain, and Shimon is my guarantor. So I will say, how does normal guarantorship work? When borrower defaults, then lender can go to guarantor. I will say in what we call an Arev Shaltzion, that wasn't the case. Rather, a lender has the ability to go right to the guarantor and bypass the borrower. So the Gemara says, don't get involved in that type of stuff. That's again, you want to be a guarantor on a debt for someone that you trust, that's fine. But avoid this type of Arvei Shaltzion, where you could bypass the borrower and go right to the guarantor. So the Gemara says, good. Not only that, but bad after bad, evil after evil, shall come on to those who accept gerim, who go and accept converts. Ula arbe shaltzion, and to those who become this shaltzion type of guarantors. Ula tokea atzmo ledvar halacha, and one who inserts himself into a dvar halacha. We'll define all of these. So I will say, what does this mean? What's wrong with accepting gerim? Rabbi Chalbo, kashim gerim liyisol kesapachas ba'ar. I will say, we saw this sugya. We saw this sugi before. Again, Misrach says Daf Mem Zayin. We saw this before, where again the Gemara says, because Gerim converts are as difficult for Klal Yisrael as sapachas, as lesions on the skin, as saras. We saw this Gemara. But remember again, we saw Machlokes Rashi Tosis. So again, one opinion says that Halacha L'Maaseh means that sometimes because Gerim are not as meticulous with mitzvos as other Jews. And remember again, the other opinion said just the opposite. What happens? Converts join Klal Yisrael. And I will say, what's the incredible thing about converts? They're so meticulous. They're so, right? You look at the convert and you say, come on, stop being so frum. Cut it out, right? Come on. Right? So I'll say, the converts become so meticulous that ultimately, again, it looks bad for the rest of Klal Yisrael. So I'll say two different diametrically opposed understandings ultimately in the Gerim. So the Gemara says, Arvei Shaltzion, Da'avdi Shluf Dutz. So we'll say Arvei Shaltzion, because ultimately they'll say Shluf Dutz means collect from here. In other words, as we just said before, the lender could bypass the borrower and go right to the guarantor. Tokea atzmo ledvar halacha. And we'll say, what's the case of Tokea ledvar halacha? The sign of Yossi Omer. We'll say this incredible Gemara. Kala Omer ein lo Torah, ein lo Torah. Okay, it's a strange idea. Anyone who says, I'm not learning Torah, does not get schar for learning Torah. Okay, pshita, seems to be pretty obvious. Ela kala omer ein lo ela Torah, ein lo ela Torah. You know what it means? What I say is someone who says, I'm only going to learn, but I'm not doing anything, only has schar for learning and not schar for doing. To which the Gemara says, okay, hanami pshita. No. Ela dafilu Torah. No, so what it means is someone who says, I'm only going to learn Torah, but I'm not doing anything, doesn't even get reward for learning Torah. My time, what's the reason? Amakra, but Amakra, v'limadatem v'asisem. Because I will say the pasuk says, v'limadatem, you will learn, and ultimately again, v'limadatem osam ushmartem osam. I will say the juxtaposition of learning, ultimately again to keeping. right? To keeping kol sheyeshno b'asi yeshno b'lemida, kol she'eno b'asi eno ela b'lemida. Rabbi say a very important Gemara that ultimately, again, the importance of learning, Rabbi say, is that what? It's maybe lidei asiya. Learning brings you to doing. But if my learning doesn't bring me to do, if my learning just remains an intellectual exercise, and ultimately, again, does not result in any dynamic life activity, then what good is learning like that? Rabbi say such an incredible idea. Eva is the other possibility is the olam kidam yisumei kara kala omer ein lo ela Torah, ein lo ela Torah. Rabbi say no, maybe it means like this: that a person says, "I'm only learning." Maybe that literally means all I have is the schar for learning. Lo tzricha de kamigmar la'achrini va'azli va'avdi. Rabbi said, listen to this. We're talking about the following case, where I myself don't do anything, but I teach others who do something. So in other words, I myself don't observe, but I teach Torah to people who do observe as a result of what I teach them. What would you have thought? You might have thought that halacha l'maisa, such a person has reward. Such a person has reward. After all, again, they're facilitating the performance of others. Kamash malan, I will say. Kamash malan, that if the teacher himself doesn't observe, even if the students observe as a result of that which the teacher is teaching, halacha l'maisa, the teacher doesn't receive reward for anything other than his learning. I will say one more piece and we'll stop. Tokea atzmo dvar halacha. We'll say, what's the case of tokea atzmo dvar halacha? What's that case? They're talking about a judge who has a case that comes before him, the Gamar halacha, and Abba say, what does he do? The Gamar halacha, Madai milsa milsa, the Isli Rabba v'lo azal mashil. Abba say, what is it talking about? A judge who has a case that comes before him, and Abba say, instead of researching the case, what does he do? He says, this case is just like a previous case, and he doesn't research. And he has a Rebbe in town, and he doesn't ask his Rebbe. And all he does is just say, this case resembles that case, and that's all I need. And I will say, ultimately, again, such a person is held culpable. The we'll say a dayan should always say as if there is a sword suspended between his legs. The Gehenim pesucha lo mitachtov, and Gehenim is open underneath him. Shnei Amar hine mitaso shel Shlomo shishim gibarim saviv la migibari Yisrael mipachad baleilos mipachad shel Gehenim shedom eleah. Because the pasuk says, bed of Shlomo Melech was surrounded by 60 strong men. We'll say this is a reference to din, which we're not going to get into now. But Lamaisa again, so we'll say either Tokela din means two important lessons. Number one, for the dayan, how careful the dayan has to treat each and every case. Each and every case must be dealt with on its own merit. And again, I will say one can simply not rely on precedent by itself. And Lamaisa again, I will say how careful one has to be to practice what we preach. Learning is wonderful. Learning is beautiful. Learning is fantastic. But the real power of learning is in its ability to generate dynamic, transformational behavior. Rabosai, shkoyach. All right, have on Zoom. Good Shabbos, everyone. Okay. Shabbos. Thank you.